Hello? Okay, hello everyone. My name is Corbin. I am a data analyst. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I started as a data analyst working for a company that was just one company, and I became a developer after being a ETL engineer and business intelligence tool developer. And after working for just one company, I made my way into consulting and did business intelligence and data analysis for many, many companies. And I've been wanting to give back. And so I thought, why not just start talking about what I've learned? And here we are. Hopefully this is helpful for you. What I've put together is kind of 6 things that I've learned after 10 years of being a data analyst. And I've put together a visual for me to kind of keep my thoughts straight and to keep myself on track on what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, so I hope you find this helpful. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was how data analyst progress typically follows 4 natural steps that when you first become a data analyst and get into the working world with a full-time career, the first thing you do is you are learning data storytelling. And this, depending on where you find yourself, this could be years. It depends on how many projects you get, how good your mentors are, how quickly you grasp the tools, especially when you're learning SQL or whatever Power BI tool you're using. Once you've learned kind of data storytelling, then you kind of go into mastering data storytelling. And this is where things get fun and leaders start coming to you for help to tell their stories. This is a really fun time, and I find that a lot of people get stuck here, especially as people really focus on data storytelling. And it's very popular. But one of the things that I found is that people who don't stay in data storytelling and move on are typically the ones who are better. And so after mastering data storytelling, I found that building data decision-making tools seems to be the next step, because in order to build a data decision-making tool, you have to understand the story that the people or the customers or the leaders are going through. And then a decision-making tool uses some of the same data points that you would use in data storytelling, but you very critically look at those data points to make a decision. And so the difference between data storytelling and data decision making is huge, and it's a really big difference. And I'm going to talk about that more in point 2. After getting into data decision making, building data decision making tools, the next step after that is where you really start seeing yourself as a product and process person. And this is where you start having conversations with leaders where it's not just give me this report or even make this decision-making tool better for me. It's where you start influencing the process that either the customer is going through or the work environment goes through. And this is where you've learned the data storytelling and you know the data and that you know the decisions that the people are making, and you know the decisions because you've been making the data decision making tools. And then you start going to them and saying, hey, I know how you can change your process and use the data that I've been giving you to really enhance what it is that you're doing. So after becoming a kind of data focused person, you become a master of data that can then speak into the product or the process that the leaders are managing. And so these are the 4 natural steps that I feel data analysts go through. I do think that if you are in a position that's not a data analyst position, you might be a product and process person who then has to learn data analysis. And so the steps might be different. But this progression I find is true predominantly for data analysts, where you go into it saying, I'm a data analyst, and this is the progression that data analysts typically go through. The second secret that I've kind of learned over these 10 years is that the key characteristic of data decision-making tools and data storytelling tools have key characteristics. And this is an easy way to differentiate them because a lot of people get confused or don't understand the difference between them. And so there are key characteristics about data storytelling tools and data decision-making tools that are different and that will empower you to see the difference. So the main characteristic for a data storytelling tool, report or dashboard, is that it has progression of time. It has progression or time. And any story needs progress. And so you're going to have, different timestamps throughout the day, or maybe you're looking at every day we achieved this, this, and this, or maybe a customer went through this step and then this step and then this step. So in data storytelling, you know that you're making a data storytelling tool and not a decision-making tool if there's time. Decision-making tools, the key characteristics for those is that it uses the benchmark actual variance framework. The benchmark actual variance framework is critical and the easiest way to identify a decision-making tool. Another way of looking at the benchmark actual variance framework is thinking about it as your plan or your goal. So that's what your benchmark is. It's your plan or your goal. And then you subtract the actual, and that will equal your variance, which in business we typically call the opportunity. And then I'm going to unpack this now. The most familiar decision-making tool that you have used on a daily basis, if you have a driver's license, is your car dashboard. I believe that the car dashboard is the greatest data decision-making tool of all time. I have been a student of the car dashboard. I know that's crazy, but the car dashboard has really inspired my thinking about data because I think it's the greatest data decision-making tool of all time. People use it from all over the world with every education, under every stress level, under every way of thinking, every logic. And the car dashboard had to work for all of us to use this thing. And so the car dashboard is incredible, and it uses the benchmark actual variance framework. So here's an example. The gas gauge on your car, right, should be super familiar. And its plan or goal is to not be empty. Anything above like 5% of gas left, you just see the little, it tells you you're 100% full or you're 50% full or you're 25% full. And then once you get to that 10 or 5% full, the gas light comes on and you have to make a decision. And that decision is, will I go get gas? And the answer should be yes, right? Like when you get to empty, you need to go get gas. And so that decision has to be made. And so the goal is to not be empty. And the actual is whatever you actually are. And then that equals your opportunity. And so if you're actually at 100% and your goal is to not be zero, the difference between these two is huge. And so you have a lot of opportunity. So you can drive really far. But as you as your actual gets lower and lower and lower and lower, and the difference between these two gets smaller and smaller and smaller, your opportunity to keep driving gets smaller and smaller and smaller. In business, if your plan, so that was the car speedometer or gas gauge. In business, let's say that you're working in a manufacturing line and you're supposed to produce 100 things per day. So your goal is 100. If you only did 80, right, then your difference is 20. And so the opportunity is then 20. Like, why didn't you achieve those 20? Those 20 that you didn't produce today when you thought you were supposed to produce 100, but you only produced 80, that is the opportunity that you're trying to go after. How do I improve so that I can reach my goal? The same is true if your goal is 100 and you produce 120, right? So then you would have a positive. So that opportunity is, why did I get more than my goal? What is the opportunity there? Does that mean that my goal should be greater? Or does that mean, something's off about my goals if I'm getting more? Or maybe it was because you had an extra person working the line of that manufacturing line. Whatever it was, the difference between your plan or your goal or your benchmark and your actual is the variance, which represents the opportunity that the business leaders have. So the ideal benchmark is the optimal. And I use the word optimal intentionally because you don't necessarily want your benchmark to be unattainable or like the highest thing, because you want people to be successful. You want, and maybe that means that your goal is super high, and so people are shooting high, but it's really important that your goals are the optimal. And this doesn't mean that they're the most efficient always. Sometimes it does. But having the conversations with leaders to find out what the goals should be is really important, because what I see a lot with new data analysts is that their reports have the actual, but don't have a goal or a plan on the report at all. Typically, people will use the average for the plan or goal. No. Typically, people will use the average as the thing that they compare the actual to. And that using the average is not a good thing to compare the actual to, because the average will be influenced by many, many factors, and you don't want people comparing themselves to the average. If you have a person or a group of people that are doing what's expected of them, and you introduce a whole bunch of new employees that bring your average down, all of your people who are doing well are then going to say, well, I'm doing better than average. I don't need to work as hard. I'm going to achieve the average. And if everybody's trying to achieve the average, what you end up seeing is that performance dips. So making sure that you have a plan or goal to compare your actual to is really important. For tracking your actual, secret number 4, data capture is really, really important. There are many times that I've worked with leaders on data projects, and I have found that the data capture was the problem. I would come in, I'd start working with a data set, and we wouldn't be able to do something, or we weren't able to get an insight. And it's really awkward because they want this thing, and it just turns out that they didn't capture the data in the way that it needed to happen. And so don't assume that the way that a CRM or a tool of some kind or a form, don't assume that the form can't be changed. If the data capture, the moment of data capture isn't doing a good job and isn't capturing the data the way that you need it, change it. Change the data capture, change the form, change the CRM input. Make sure that when you're collecting that actual data, that the data capture is happening the way that you need it to. There are times where we have enhanced the way that data is captured, and it's unlocked incredible value for leaders to have insight into what is going on. All right, so plan, actual, opportunity. This is what leaders talk about. If you have had the opportunity to be in the room when presidents, vice presidents, CEOs are talking, what they are not talking about are the actuals, because that's the manager's job. Sometimes they are, if a manager's not doing their job, but they don't want to be talking about that. Leaders do not want to be talking about what's actually happening today, because they have middle management to do that on a daily basis. They also set goals, leaders do, and then they move on. The thing that they move on to is the opportunity. They want to know, how do we improve the system? How do we touch the system? How do we change the system? How do I break things? This is what good leaders are doing, is they're not thinking about the steady state. They're talking about the things that are going to change. And the things that are going to change are either implementation of steps in order to improve the actual to get it to the goal, right? That's the opportunity to get better. Or they're going to be changing things about the tools, the software, how big the workforce is, in order to be able to change their goals. So if you ever have conversations with leaders, they are talking about the opportunity. And the opportunity is what sits between the goals and what's actually happening. You will find that leaders will actually have conversations with you if you can figure this out. And as a data analyst, you can have insight into the opportunity in a way that people who aren't data savvy won't be able to speak to leaders. So this is a big way, understanding this, finding your way up the chain of learning how to interact with data to data decision making, and then kind of that moment where you become a trusted advisor to leadership, where you're talking about that opportunity and you're working on the process and the product. This is going to be huge. So leaders talk about opportunity. The sixth and final tip that I have learned is that the best data solution has these 3 qualities. And those 3 qualities are, this is the bare minimum, is it has to work. So the best data solutions, when you have the opportunity to create data pipelines and data transformation and data visualization layers, it has to work. I know that sounds stupid, but it's kind of the top bare minimum. You need something that works. The next layer of creating data solutions is that it has to be sustainable. Let me just say it's sustainable. There are so many times when people will go down a road with the most expensive visualization front end, and then leadership says, hey, you know what? We actually don't want to pay for these licenses. And so then you have to recreate in Excel, or you have to recreate in some other cheaper business intelligence tool. The best data solution is the one that is going to be sustainable. And this also leads into the best data solutions are the ones that are familiar to the team and to the users. I don't know how many times I've done consulting projects where a leader wants to change the tools that the team uses. And sometimes I can talk them off that ledge, sometimes I can't. If you have a really competent team who's not in a position to learn new things, and when I say not in a position to learn new things, I mean the team is just burnt out or not willing or doesn't have the time or is retiring in 2 or 3 years. Use the tools that the team will use. A familiar tool is a tool that the people will use. So the best data solution has these 3 qualities. It works, it's sustainable, and it's familiar. And this is, it might sound disappointing as especially a newer data analyst, because at the beginning of your data analysis career, you're often learning all of the new tools and all of the coding languages and all of these neat libraries. So you want to try to use the best, or you want to try to use the latest. Incredibly profitable, excellent companies that are efficient are almost entirely run on Excel. That's simply the way it is. And so when you're working with companies, especially small businesses that are mom and pop owned, that might be incredibly profitable and doing amazing, they may never actually use a Power BI or a Tableau. They may live in Excel forever, and that's okay. That's one of the things that I found is super profitable companies. One of the ways, especially smaller to medium, middle-sized companies, one of the ways that they're so successful is that they just don't deal with things that don't work, or they don't deal with complicated things. And so choosing tools that work, that are sustainable, and that are familiar, that's a way that you can be really successful when you're rolling out a new data solution. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful for you. And yeah, good luck.